Aggressive decks in Pioneer have been in a bit of a rough spot for a little while now, mostly because of certain decks that tended to punish their want to play cheap, small creatures en masse by shutting them out of the game before they could even get someone's life total below half. Because of this, aggro decks had to shift towards a theme in order to really prosper, or as some people might refer to it, a gimmick. Boros Convoke was the first of these to really go wide with Gleeful Demolition and pump out 20 damage ASAP with a follow-up Loxodon, and then it was the heroic version of Boros stepping back into the limelight with the go tall and prevent their single threats from dying type of method. Both of these decks were Boros, which didn't do a lot for other types of aggressive decks out there. However, with the introduction of a Singleton Bird Wizard, Pioneer pilots have started to shift away from the white and into the green to try to beat their opponents down with value and velocity. Sit down, strap on in, and let's talk about the new spell slingers in town. Gruul Aggro, or perhaps you might know it as Gruul Prowess. An aggro deck through and through, the Gruul Prowess deck takes a theme from a previous Pioneer and Standard archetype and iterates on it with some of the best parts the other fast strategies have now. The Atarka red deck was a mono red deck that ended up splashing green for Atarka's command, which gave it the name. It played to the board, had expendable creatures, and had a burn spell backup plan, and while this archetype still does exist in the format, the newer version of Gruul takes that list and adds some green cards to the main deck, swaps the spell package to mirror that of a bit of an old Is It Wizard strategy, and even mimics some of the play patterns that the Boros Heroic deck has available to it. What you end up with is an extremely fast deck that does not always fold to board wipes, and gain some extra longevity through slinging spells like auras and card advantage engines to close out games. Now, just to note before we jump too far into things that these lists tend to run Jegantha the Wellspring as a companion. Although not core to the deck's game plan, the way the deck is constructed, it uses a lot of single color mana pips as is, with the double or higher costing spells that it could run not being as good as having a free 5 mana 5/5 to recover from a board wipe with every single game. And since Jegantha isn't really core to the strategy of the deck, while it is in the sideboard and it is a companion, we're really not going to talk about it too much because it very rarely comes up, but when it does, hey, it's a 5/5. The deck starts off with a core package of somewhere between 17 and 19 cheap, aggressive creatures that take advantage of the prowess keyword or pseudo abilities that mimic prowess. That means poster children of prowess, Monastery Swiftspear, and Soulscar Mage take center stage in this deck, putting down 1 mana threats that scale with all the spells you'll be slinging later on. Joining the dynamic duo is their new best friend and Pioneer All-Star or Rookie of the Year, Slickshot Show-Off, a 1/2 hasty flying bird wizard that everyone is quickly getting acquainted with. While Show-Off doesn't have true prowess, it has a version that is even better for a deck that wants to close a game early, sacrificing the toughness part for an extra point of damage for each non-creature spell cast. That does mean our bird can die to a single shock, but we have ways to deal with that later in the list. Questing Druid is the other key addition to the deck, and a large reason why green mana is needed at all. A 1/1 for 2 looks weak in an aggressive shell, but its upgraded prowess ability is the best looking Quirion Dryad that we've had in a while because of its adventure side. Seek the Beast. Adventuring our Druid is a powerful effect similar to Light Up the Stage or Reckless Impulse that can be played at instant speed, triggering prowess, but it is a key piece to our deck in order to push through lethal damage after an attack is declared, or restock our fake hand and battlefield after a tough series of removal. The remaining few creature slots have a little bit of wiggle room, which really depends on the kind of metagame you're going to be expecting to play against. The consensus seems to be that some number of Rampaging Ferocidon should be in the main deck, as Amalia and other aggro decks will hate to see the Raptor across the battlefield from them. The anti-life gain clause is also effective against control decks looking to sort of time walk you with life gain spells, or a cheeky version of the Wandering Emperor. The last slots can be a little different for each pilot. Some lists enjoy packing Fugitive Codebreaker as not only another hasty prowess threat to the deck, but one that can be disguised in order to restock an empty hand or one full of lands to rebuild or stretch our spells a little bit further to burn off the last few points of life from our opponents. Picnic Ruiner has mostly fallen out of favor, but has seen play in Magic: The Gathering online leagues just recently. This 2/2 for 2 is able to impersonate an Illuminator Virtuoso from the Boros Heroic deck if you get his power high enough with Double Strike, and in a pinch can not only trigger prowess with its Adventure Side Stolen Goodies, but buff up to 3 of our other creatures in the process permanently. Gitu Lava Runner is a third 1-drop creature that saw play in older Is It Wizards lists thanks to, well, its wizard creature type. With enough spells in our deck, this is almost always a 2/2 haster instead of a 1/2, and the inclusion of this card is specifically for lists that want to leverage Wizard's Lightning, as this card, Show-Off, and Soulscar Mage make 12 wizards to reduce the mana cost to a single red, mimicking an actual lightning bolt. Lastly, Rimrock Knight is a spicy addition that throws back to the old Embercleave list from Standard and Pioneer Pass that would sneak through 2 extra damage for 1 mana with the Adventure Side, Boulder Rush at instant speed, totaling for 3 damage with a Prowess trigger or 4 damage on a Slickshot Show-Off in this case specifically. Being an extra body in a pinch is nothing to scoff at, even if the dwarf only has 1 toughness itself. A prowess deck wouldn't be good without a suite of sweet spells to sling alongside its creature package. So let's take a look at what Gruul brings that other colors just don't have. Blossoming Defense is the instant spell that makes the deck really want to be green alongside the creature package. A single mana not only adds 2 power, or 3 of the prowess trigger, but also gives our creatures hexproof until end of turn. This is a more aggressive take on the spells that Heroic runs to save its own creatures, albeit this one doesn't save them from board wipes. Audacity is the other green spell, which is an aura that every list is playing at least a couple of copies of. This Rancor clone gives a much needed trample effect to our ground creatures in addition to +2 power. Now the upside of this over some other similar effects in red is not only does the power boost stick around for the following turns, but the aura itself draws us a card if our creature gets removed to help with coming back into a game. Atarka's Command has fallen out of favor so much that the deck is no longer named after that card, but it does still see main deck play in most lists with at least 1 copy, if not more. This modal instant is great at stopping a Malia combo early with its can't gain life clause, while 2 of its modes help close out a game incredibly fast by pumping our team of creatures and dealing 3 damage to the face. The extra land mode very rarely gets used, but it can be activated on an opponent's turn if we're looking for a multi-spell follow-up killing blow type of turn, although the more damaging modes are probably better in almost every circumstance. The rest of our deck is mono red, including a lot of familiar faces to older red deck win type list players. The biggest one is going to be Monstrous Rage, as this acts in tandem with Audacity to push a ton of damage onto our opponents thanks to Trample. The monster roll sticks around, giving it perma +1/+1 and trample to whatever we cast it on, but this spell alone represents 4 damage on a prowess creature and 5 damage on a Slickshot Show-Off the turn that we play it. The card is a key player into the faster kills we can have with the deck, which we'll go over more in depth later on. Play with Fire and Wizard's Lightning are the burn spells of choice to help push non-combat damage on our opponents while also being able to clear the way of some blockers. Now of note, not every list is going to be running Wizard's Lightning because they may not have the critical number of wizards to reduce the cost to a normal lightning bolt. To make the card worth running over similar spells, you'll want to have at least 12 wizards in your list. Play with Fire, on the other hand, is just the best shock variant in Pioneer, as the times that you point it at an opponent's face can also help you fix your draws for the following turn. Kumano Faces Kakazan isn't an instant, but it still triggers prowess on our creatures. The second chapter of this saga pairs nicely with a plotted Slickshot Show-Off or a hasty 1-drop, putting them permanently out of shock range, while Chapter 3 gives us another haste creature we can go wide with alongside a Tarka's Command. Now, lists that don't run Wizard's Lightning are going to take those slots and devote them to additional removal spells, mainly things like Witchstalker Frenzy and Spikefield Hazard. Frenzy is the best way for a red-based deck to clear the board of giant stopgaps in the aggro plan, such as Sheoldred the Apocalypse, for as low as 1 mana with just enough attackers. Meanwhile, Spikefield Hazard is a 1-damage prowess enabler that can pick off smaller creatures such as elves, and in a pinch, you can play Hazard on its Spikefield Cave side to get out of mana screw situations. Lands in the Gruul Prowess deck are pretty streamlined at this point, with most lists running 20 total lands, not counting any additional Spikefield Hazards you may have. 4 Stomping Grounds, Copperline Gorge, and Carpulsan Forest are mandatory to have both colors of mana online as early as turn 1 or 2, while the number of Crag Crown, Timber Crown pathways can fluctuate. Den of the Bugbear is the creature land of choice, being able to add tokens to the battlefield, while Sokenzan Crucible of Defiance can do the same with its channel ability. Now, most lists only run 2 basic mountains with no basic forests in sight, but do run a singleton Boseiju Who Endures to shut down pesky artifacts or enchantments. Lists that go down on pathways may also add in Ramanamp Ruins to the list, as the desert can sacrifice itself to its own ability to shock an opponent for 2 damage that might be hard to push through later in the game. Sideboarding for Gruul Prowess is going to attempt to cover the areas smashing for 20 as fast as possible, just can't quite reach. Pick Your Poison is an all-star card that deals with multiple things that can stop our deck from beating down and burning to the ground. It deals with Leyline of Sanctity, stopping us from targeting our opponents with our spells, as well as cards like Atraxa Grand Unifier from completely stonewalling us. Rending Volley and Chandra's Defeat are 1 mana ways to clear the board of blockers for different types of decks, with Volley being a 1 mana answer to Amalia without costing us any life, and meanwhile Chandra's Defeat takes down opposing Slickshot Show-Offs and Rampaging Ferocidons trying to snuff us out first. Red Cat Melee also falls into this category of removal spell, with the upside of hitting any planeswalker in the format and not just a Chandra for 4 damage. The downside of sacrificing a land isn't too bad when our deck only really needs 2 or 3 of them to operate at maximum efficiency. Now, Graveyard Hate can take 2 different forms from Gruul, starting with soft Graveyard Hate like Grafdigger's Cage to make sure nothing comes back from the graveyard, like an Arclight Phoenix. On the flip side, Clotha's God of Destiny is a card that won't really be swinging in for damage in our deck, but instead chews up the graveyards of decks like Izzet Phoenix and Amalia combo while taking pot shots at their life totals for doing so. Really hard to get rid of thanks to its indestructibility, Clothis also adds longevity to our deck and as a bonus, doesn't target our opponents when dealing damage. Take that, Leyline. Magebane Lizard is a powerful anti-combo card that can be a bit of a double-edged sword from our own sideboard. Its damage-dealing clause not only stacks so that each additional non-creature spell increases the damage taken each time, but the effect of this lizard is a symmetrical one. That means if we want to play 3 spells in a turn to buff up our creatures, we're going to be taking 6 damage to do so play your spells carefully with this card out. Of course, that makes this card great in the mirror as well. Burning Hands is seeing inclusion in lists again thanks to the rise of Mono Green Devotion Shell that plays a lot more creatures than it used to. Dealing 6 damage to a green creature or planeswalker kills just about everything in their deck that isn't growing somehow and does so at instant speed. Case of the Crimson Pulse comes in against control decks and games we expect to go a little bit longer. The case not only filters 2 cards with a draw and discard effect when it enters, but it rewards us for playing all of our spells as quickly as possible. If we can get empty-handed, we'll start every turn with 3 new cards in our hand instead of just our 1 normal draw step, thanks to Case drawing us 2 more when solved. We do have to discard our hand on our upkeep, but if we're already emptying it, that won't matter too much. The final slots of the sideboard are dedicated to additional copies of cards like Rampaging Ferocidon and Witchstalker's Frenzy from our main deck, coming in when you need their effects to shut down a specific deck archetype. Ferocidon can also punish decks that want to play tons of creatures like Convoke, while Witchstalker Frenzy is even able to chop down a Vein Ripper. The way that you play the Gruul deck can be straightforward at times, although it's not always correct to just blow all your spells at once and leave nothing on the table. That being said, the deck is incredibly explosive and has a few nut draws to kill somebody quickly. The one every opponent is hoping to avoid involves you swinging in with an incredibly large show-off as early as turn 3, whether it's because of plot or not. The most damage output from this sequence would be to turn 1, cast and attack with Monastery Swiftspear, turn 2, repeat this with Slickshot Show-Off alongside, and then turn 3, go crazy with spells, potentially killing them outright. While the single most damaging trio of spells here would be triple Monstrous Rage for an insane total of 20 damage on turn 3 alone, you're more likely to have a more diverse sequence of spells for slightly less damage. Blossoming Defense into Monstrous Rage, followed up by Play with Fire, still deals 18 damage to an opponent, killing them thanks to our 2 potshots of damage for the first 2 turns. While this is obviously the best case scenario for the deck, it's also showing us that with this Gruul deck, any damage you can land can and will matter by the end of the game. Now, if we played a Soulscar Mage instead of a Swiftspear on turn 1, for example, we would only kill our opponents on turn 3 by playing our Slickshot on turn 2 instead of plotting it, exposing it to removal. If we have Swiftspear and Plot Show-Off on turn 2, we can still kill turn 3 thanks to the additional 1 damage that was dealt the turn that we played it. While we do have lots of aggressive lines like these, we also have some more conservative play patterns to ensure that we don't lose creatures to removal or that we just don't die if our opponent destroys our board. Waiting to play creatures with haste until you have 1 extra mana to protect them with a Blossoming Defense can be the difference between victory and defeat. Now, while this sounds easy, it often means playing a single spell or creature per turn and always holding back that 1 mana from turn 1 forward, which can be harder to do if we have a hand with a Kamano and a Slickshot, for example, which represents a lot of damage. Questing Druid is another key card in our deck that helps us recover from board wipes and removal spells. Knowing when you want to cast the adventure to advance the board versus holding it in hand to grow the Druid itself the same turn you get those extra spells is something you'll learn by playing the deck more. And of course, if you're on a list with multiple Atarka's commands, you need to know when your deck should be going wider with multiple 1-drops over a Show-Off or Ferocidon that wears auras and can go taller. A Swiftspear and Show-Off together can deal 10 damage with Atarka's command using the 2 aggressive modes, while a board with Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage, and Gitu Lava Runner can deal 11 or 12 damage if that Atarka's command is the second instant for Lava Runner's static ability in the graveyard. Gruul aggro has been on the rise recently thanks to good matchups against the mid-range decks that might dirtle around a little bit, and decks like some control or combo lists that can take too long to interact with them. Rakdos Vampires can die under a Sorintel combo if you shut off their life gain or just kill them fast enough, while decks like Lotus Combo need to see temporary lockdown on curve post-sideboard against your deck, or else they suffer a loss. Niv-to-Light is also a deck that can be just too slow to deal with the power of Prowess, giving you solid top meta matchups. The deck itself is also great against lesser seen decks like Boros Convoke, as they might not be able to beat a turn 3 or 4 kill hand thanks to flying and trample. While the deck is fast enough to sometimes beat just about anything in the metagame, there are decks that go toe-to-toe with Prowess even with their best hands. Decks that gain lots of life are an issue if you're down on Ferocidon or Atarka's commands, especially if they do things like wipe your board in the process. Amalia combo and Azorius control, both with and without Lotus Field, can be issues if you don't kill them fast enough or if you don't have the right cards to attack their style of deck. Other aggro decks can also be a bit of a coin flip, like a mono red list with such similar game plan to ours that a good draw from them versus an average draw from us could just be all that matters. Waste Not is also a deck that plays the control game with tons of kill spells, but their deck can lose to ours more times than you'd think thanks to the variance their draws have with and without their namesake card. Decks that play lots of removal and decks that can put up plenty of stone walls in front of our creatures are going to be the bad matchups for Gruul Prowess. Now, mono black or Golgari style mid-range decks that don't need an engine like Waste Not are very hard to compete with, as they just slam removal spells and big threatening blockers that we just struggle to deal with. Although these decks are rarer, Izzet Phoenix is not and will be a pain at larger events. The deck can put up flying blockers ad nauseum and buys enough time for them to find their killing line over us. Mono green Devotion is another issue, as they aren't as fast as we are, but they sure are bigger. Cavalier of Thorns specifically is an issue for our deck, or I guess a big thorn in our side, as it not only can block Slickshot Show-Off with reach, but has a big butt to soak up damage from our burn spells trying to kill it. Heroic is a matchup that I was tempted to put in the okay tier, but the more I hear about it and watch some gameplay, the more I think it's slightly unfavorable thanks to their speed backed up by their ability to play a better defense than us without losing creatures to our combat tricks. Now, playing Gruul Prowess, the deck will have plenty of games where you just turn things sideways and then get to use the restroom or grab lunch in between rounds of a bigger event. But that doesn't mean that it's an easy deck to learn to play. Like most decks, you'll want to have as much practice as possible, especially when you're first picking up the deck to play it, although it is true that you'll need less games overall to feel confident taking it to something like an RCQ nearby you. Your goal in practice is not only identify your winning lines as quickly as possible, but know when to hold back or even have to play some defense, and then of course figuring out your optimal sideboard plan for whatever metagame you anticipate playing into. Overall, new pilots to the deck will probably want to play at least 10 to maybe even 20 matches with the deck before seriously competing or considering competing with the archetype, so this works out to about a month of FNMs or a handful of Magic the Gathering online leagues. It's not too much. I would actually suggest this deck to players unfamiliar with the format that are playing Pioneer for their first time due to the RCQ season, as it's a deck that can operate well even without knowledge of the entire format and what each deck is running across all of its 75 or 90 cards in the case of Yorion decks. So how do we all feel about the lean, mean, partly green machine in Gruul Prowess? Is the deck slick enough for you to give it a try, or is it a little too fast, too furious for your liking? Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on the deck, and while you're down there, give a thumbs up to the video if you've enjoyed it. As always, make sure to tap that subscribe button to stay up to date on the latest deck techs, metagame analysis, and in general, Magic content from me. See you later.